I love dressing like a clown, so I decided to make a patchwork clown shirt out of scrap fabric. I really wanted this shirt to have the essence in a clown in shape, colour and pattern, so I took direct inspiration from the shape of a circus tent and added a Harley Quinn yellow, pink and orange pattern to it. I use these colours because they are my go-to combination when working with more than 2 colours, but I also feel like grouping together either warm or cool colours really looks like a clown to me because they either have those big exaggerated smiles or big exaggerated frowns. With my idea all laid out, I then went into my scrap box and picked out all my fabric pieces. I was very lucky to find colours that I needed in identical fabrics. However, I did have a lot more orange than I did yellow or pink, so I changed up my pattern ever so slightly to make it more orange so I'd have enough fabric to make the whole shirt. Next, I started out the process of making my fabric by first cutting out many little tiny squares of fabric. When I've done Harley Quinn patterns in the past, I've always done them using diamonds, which made it much more difficult to sew because it's much harder to match up all the corners, so I wanted to go for the easier option this time and work with squares. To decide on which side I wanted to use for this, I took my smallest piece of scrap fabric and cut out the biggest square possible out of it. This happened to be a pink piece, which was definitely helpful as this is the fabric I had the least amount of, and I would have definitely struggled to create enough pieces of the pink if they were any bigger than this. Ultimately, the squares ended up being 4 inches by 4 inches in size, and I think this is a really good size for my body because it means that you have a lot of the Harley Quinn pattern without having too much of it where it just looks a bit too overwhelming. With all my squares cut out, I then sewed them all together, which took a very long time to do. I decided to do this in diagonal lines so I wouldn't accidentally mess up my pattern by sewing the colours in the wrong order. With all the diagonal lines, they only have 2 alternating colours, so they are much harder to go wrong with. Each piece of the line is also technically sewn on twice during this part, as I was sewing them together with a straight stitch and then going along the raw edge with a zigzag stitch to stop the fabric unravelling. As these are scrap pieces, I have used this fabric before, and I know that it does tend to fray quickly when I wear it, especially if you don't leave enough seam allowance, and with these squares being so small, I didn't want to eat away at them with larger seams. Therefore, the only way to stop it unravelling was to sew a zigzag stitch onto every single seam I created. When I sewed these diagonal lines together, I also double sewed everything, but this process was much quicker as I was able to sew multiple squares together at once rather than individually. Overall, this process takes a really long time and it can be annoying, but if you just get in the swing of things, I actually found it quite enjoyable. It's very melodic and very repetitive, which I quite enjoy in a sewing project. I completely forgot to say, but I did make a pattern piece for this using the t-shirt that I'm actually wearing currently. I just moved the outer seams in a little bit so you get more of that circus tent vibe. With the main base piece done, I then moved on to making the scallops for the bottom of my shirt. For this, I cut out long rectangles and sewed them together in a line the same way I did all the other squares. When cutting out these pieces, I just eyeballed what I thought a double length of what I needed would be by just over 1/5 of the width of the shirt. This way I knew it would definitely be long enough and wide enough to be sewn in the way I wanted it to. Once I had that long strip created, I then folded it in half and marked out all my scallops with a martini glass. I used a martini glass because it was a circular object that had a big enough diameter to cover the individual colours. I really wanted each colour to be its own scallop with no overlapping colours, because to me it just looks more like a circus tent when done this way, because the roof edge of a circus tent are always perfectly lined up with those red and white stripes. I also just found it more fun doing it this way because it looks like you put a lot more effort into it when you actually didn't put any more effort into it whatsoever. With my markings all in place, I then just traced over them with my sewing machine to get a nice clean row of scallops. This is the sort of sewing that I love to do because it's not something you can buy at a regular shop. Obviously scallop t-shirts do exist, but I've never seen one where they have both a bold bright colour and a big obvious scallop. There just unfortunately isn't enough of a market for them to sell this type of fashion, and I always find that unfortunate because it stops people getting into alternative fashion, as the barrier for entry just appears a lot higher than it actually is. Obviously the clothing I make is relatively difficult to make if you don't know how to sew, but alternative fashion really can be made out of anything. I would personally recommend going to charity shops, buying t-shirts that you kind of like the look of, cutting them up a bit and gluing random things onto them. It's so much fun to do. Now that I had sewn both the base piece and the scallop edging, I just sewed them together. I actually did this twice because the first time I did it the shirt felt too long, so I re-sewed my seam a little further into both of the pieces to get it to a length I was more happy with. I just really love a really short top. The shorter the better in my opinion. Next, I bound those raw edges that run down from the neck to the armpit. For this, I cut out a bias strip of the same orange fabric I was already using and sewed them good size together down that side while pulling the strips ever so slightly to accommodate for the curvature. This is definitely the easiest and quickest way to make a sewing project look more done than it actually is because it hides all those raw edges and makes everything look perfect. After that, I just sewed on the collar piece, which I did in the exact same way before adding a buckle onto the back. Basically, I made this collar more like a choker that doesn't really have any stretch to it, so that I wouldn't have to use stretch fabric on the front of the garment. I actually really like the look of this because I wear a lot of collars anyway, but it does mean I'm kind of limited in terms of layering because it's got that big buckle in the back. Alternatively, I could have added a smaller trouser clasp or a button onto this instead, but I already owned these orange and black clasps from a previous project, and therefore I opted to use them rather than going out and buy more sewing supplies when I already have so many of them. All in all, I do really like the collar piece. I just wish I'd done it slightly differently so I could accessorize this shirt a little bit more easily. With that piece added, the front of the shirt was now finished and I moved on to the back. For the back of the shirt, I wanted to use a fabric that was easy to get in and out of but also still match the top, so I used a very orange lycra. To attach it, I just followed the curve of the front of my shirt with my sewing machine, and then I did a few rounds of fitting to make it tighter on my body, but not too tight in a way that took away from the circus shaped tent that I wanted to achieve. At this point, I was done with the fabric section of this top, so I threw it in the wash like I always do with my projects, and when I got it back out, I noticed it was really wrinkled, so I decided to iron and starch it. To do this, I just sprayed a light layer of starch over the front and then ironed it flat. It's very quick and easy and definitely makes a difference, so it might have to become a regular part of my sewing process from now on. Finally, I wanted to add bells onto the bottom of my shirt to really give it that clown look, but I can't stand the noise of bells, so I started out by taking the ball out the center of them. To do this, I had to really carefully peel back one of the metal tongues and just shake the ball out. I tried doing it with a clamp, but the clamp wasn't small enough, so I ended up kind of just doing it with my nails, and that worked absolutely fine. The only issue that I had was I really scraped up my thumbnail, but I just add a little bit of nail oil and it's absolutely fine again. If you want to do something like this, I would just recommend being really careful with it because this metal is very easy to break and it also warps slightly when you put it back over, so you have to go into it knowing that it's probably not going to be the exact same perfect shape that it was before you started. With the jingle taken out the bells, I then sewed them directly onto my t-shirt. To go with the very uniform pattern that I created, I sewed them directly on the lowest point of every single scallop. I personally feel like this really elevates the clown element of this look and really makes it obvious where I got my inspiration from. It also makes this piece even more unique and interesting because I haven't really seen clothing with bells on it in a very long time unless it's a Christmas piece. And the thing about Christmas clothing is that it tends to be really thick fabric, so you can't really wear it any other time of year, whereas this piece has a much thinner material and it's also a t-shirt, which just makes it more wearable all year round. With that said, this piece is actually completely finished and I can finally show you the final result. I am so happy with how this turned out. It's so me, but also a little bit different for me at the same time. I really like how organized the piece looks. Like all the fabric came out so much better than what I've done in the past. Whenever I've done Harlequin fabrics before, they have never turned out this good. I think that is definitely down to me using squares instead of diamonds. Squares is definitely the way to go. I'm pretty sure I wasn't using them last time I did Harlequin because I thought it would look too much like a picnic blanket, but once it's on clothing, I really don't think it reads picnic blanket to me. So if I want to do this sort of pattern in the future, I will definitely be doing it this way and not the diamond way. I'm also super happy with how the inside of this looks. I never really care about how the inside of my clothing looks because no one's ever going to see it. But for this one in particular, it looks so clean and neat on the inside and I just think it looks pretty. It makes me think that maybe in the future I could do a piece that's fully reversible where I use a different color on the inside and the outside, because I'm slowly learning to make everything look a little bit more neat and a little bit more professional while still having that flair that I want it to. But yeah, that is it for this video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a like down below, comment what else you'd like me to do, and subscribe as I post a new video every single week, and I'd love to see you again. But until then, bye!